Hey there. Okay, I've got another quick one, just kind of related to the last lecture. We talked about human impacts and climate change previously. I just want to give you a brief introduction into climate models, and it's just another way that we look at climate change. So I'm just going to kind of, again, 10,000 foot view on this sort of thing. And we get to, again, the basic question: is climate change occurring? The scientific consensus is yes, right? Multiple lines of evidence based upon the scientific method, right? And so you can't just throw out a hypothesis. You have to have data to support your hypothesis, and lots of people are looking at this, and lots of people are criticizing it, and we are rejecting ideas that aren't supported by evidence, and over time we tend to get rid of bad ideas and we get a better understanding. Science does a very good job of understanding the natural world, and so based upon this whole body of work, we can say pretty confidently that yes, it is occurring. It is a very complicated problem. We can talk about fossil fuels and carbon dioxide, but there's many, many aspects to climate change that we need to study. And if we're trying to figure out ways to stop it or even reverse it, that's a very complicated problem. Lots of moving levers. So remember our discussion about ecosystems and communities, and we had simple model, where you've got lots of things. And remember we talked about things like keystone predators, or you can just disrupting a single part of the food web can have cascading effects throughout the entire thing. And so climate change is that sort of idea writ large, right? Where there's lots of factors that are involved, and it's very complicated. And so one way to get a handle on this is by the use of models, and we did some very simple models early on, but when you're studying large-scale ecological phenomena, you do a lot of modeling. It helps us understand complex systems. We can't conduct experiments on the entire globe. We can't conduct experiments on entire ecosystems, right? That's not possible. So our only source is to try to take things that we know and construct models and see what the models tell us. We can take and conduct experiments on pieces, at smaller levels, and then we can see what happens when we put them all together. That's about the best we can do, and that would be a model. This is not just an ecology thing. Every discipline does modeling on some level. Economics are very important, right? And business models, and so trying to simulate reality based on your best data, that's what a model is. And so it allows you to try to get an understanding of complex things that are just too complicated to do experiments on. And you can investigate all kinds of different potential scenarios. And models aren't perfect. They don't allow you to predict the future with perfect accuracy, but they do give you the ability to kind of understand things better. Whenever you think in your brain, this is what I think will happen. If wherever we talk about climate change or any kind of thing, you can sit here and say, well, this is what I think will happen. You're doing a model. You're taking lots of things and seeing how they work together in your brain and come out with a result. Well, the model just formalizes that and quantifies it using real data. And you can make abstractions of reality that are pretty darn good. So the example I gave is video games. Video games are incredible, right? Where you have all these individual interlocking parts that are all simultaneously and they all relate to one another, and you change one and they respond to that change. That's how life works, but that's how video games work. Well, video games are just models, right? So this is, a very useful way to try to understand things. And so for climate change, we look at lots of different climate models, and there's just, I'm no expert on this, but this is a huge, enormous field of study. But you look at inputs, carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, things like that, and you ask, how will they affect temperature? That's the basic idea, is we're trying to predict how changes that we make will influence temperature. Looking at that those large scale nutrient and energy problems and nutrient cycles, and on something this large, a global problem requires a global solution. And so you can look at what different countries do and different things around the world, and how can that have an effect on the entire globe. And so you'll find out there's all kinds of different models. Different people. Again, this is when we talk about competing hypotheses, and how different scientists have different hypotheses, and how we pit them against each other. This is a great way of explaining that. Different models use different things. They emphasize different parts. Somebody thinks that burning coal is the most important thing. Somebody says, yeah, burning coal is important, but the ocean taking up carbon dioxide, that's more important. Those are competing hypotheses, and so you make different models and you see how they work. So there's tons and tons of different climate models out there, but they all kind of come to the consensus that by 2100, global temperatures will be about 4 or 4.5 degrees Celsius warmer. And so in the past, century, we've seen maybe not quite 1 degree increase. We're talking 4 or 4.5 degree increase Celsius. That is a significant change in global temperatures. Now, say 2100, what do I care? Some of you might still be alive by then, right? It's not unheard of for some of you college students now who are in your 20s. People live to be 100, right? You could see this, but certainly your children will be alive then. And so it's all about, your responsibility to others and your responsibility to the future. These are things that you have to think about. And like I said, we've seen about a 1C increase in the last 100 years. And so this 4.5 is above pre-industrial level. So that includes the one we've already seen. And so, here again, you're looking at the source of CO2 emissions by different things, and you can see the radical increase in the late 20th century. And this is from the BP statistical group. So this is probably from British Petroleum. So this is, again, where your source of data? Well, if this is from BP, I mean, they would know a lot about petroleum and sources of carbon and fossil fuels. But let me, and you can see here again the relative importance of things like coal, oil, and gas. Those clearly are the things that are most important to carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And again, we can look at different effects, different lines of evidence showing what happens with increasing temperature and the Lake Chad, and you can see how it's drying up. But then, this is the social and socioeconomic aspect of global warming, of climate change, is that you're going to see things like water drying up and crops failing, and those have huge impacts on humans and society. And those are the sort of things that drive mass migrations of people and cause wars in that. And there's some people who think that the next major war is going to be over fresh water, because it's going to become more scarce because the planet's getting warmer. And again, these are just different examples of potential ideas of what could happen with global warming. Food insecurity, 200,000 displaced because of food insecurity, because of droughts and crop failure. This is from the U.S. Department of Defense. Climate change could have significant geopolitical impacts. It will contribute to food and water scarcity, increase the spread of disease, and spur exacerbate mass migration. Well, we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic, right? You can see what one, disease, what one virus can do to disrupt society. As temperatures warm up, diseases become more prevalent. The vectors of diseases become more prevalent. Insects and the diseases themselves move around better, and so you can see that what we're seeing right now with COVID is just going to be worse in a warmer planet. Climate change alone does not cause conflict. It can act as an accelerant of instability. So this is the Department of Defense trying to predict, where's the next war going to be and what's it going to be over. And so, again, we're back to these models of what's going to happen. And this is looking at, the predicted release of greenhouse gases by different countries. And so this is the business as usual model, right? If our use of fossil fuels in these different countries goes as predicted, increasing for most of these countries, that's going to add so much carbon to the atmosphere that you're predicting about a 4.5 degree increase in temperatures. Okay, so now we don't need to look in detail at every one of these bullets, but these are just some of the things that are predicted to happen with such an increase in global temperatures. You're looking at multi-meter sea level rise, right? And lots of people live near the water, and so rising water levels of several meters is going to have tremendous flooding. But you're also looking at increase in the frequency of drought because of changes in patterns. You're seeing lots of irreversible changes where we establish a new equilibrium and we can't get back to where we started. And so just some of these pictures here are an estimate of what would happen with such a sea level rise, right? You see how much of London is flooded, Shanghai, huge areas flooded. But again, if things get warmer and drier, that's going to affect agriculture. And so you can see lots of crops reduced by huge amounts. That's going to lead to global instability. That's going to lead to mass migration of people. If we could reverse climate change, if we could take some action on climate, what are some of the potential benefits? We can sit here and it's hard to think of all these costs, but you're going to have fewer human deaths. You're going to have less air pollution if we stop burning so many fossil fuels. Things like asthma, again, the diseases and pathogens would not be as important if we were able to stop climate change. And simply new markets for renewable sources of energy. Here in Kentucky, it's a very controversial thing. Like, coal is very important, and absolutely, we understand that people need jobs, and we can't just take away people's jobs without giving them any help. But you got to see the writing on the wall. Those coal jobs are going away anyway. But we can just transition people into a different economy, an economy that's based on renewable sources of energy. And so you could just train people for new jobs. That's the way society has always worked, and it's something that needs to be done. Even with more moderate global warming, if we did take climate change and we were able to reduce our fossil fuel consumption, you're still going to see major changes, not as dramatic as 4.5 degrees warming, right? One of the things that we're seeing already, that even with just 1.5 degree of warming, is lots of coral bleaching. And so what is coral bleaching? Corals, again, are animals that live in the ocean, and they have a mutualistic relationship with dinoflagellates, little protozoans. And so remember mutualism, right? Two species that interact closely and they both benefit. Well, the dinoflagellates can't tolerate that warmer water. It starts to kill them. Dying dinoflagellates are recognized by the coral as a problem, and so as part of their immune system response, they expel the dinoflagellates. But remember, this is a mutualistic relationship. The corals need the oxygen and things given off by the dinoflagellates. And so when the dinoflagellates die, then the corals die. And that's what coral bleaching is. And we're seeing massive amounts of this already, and it's just going to get worse as the waters get warmer. And coral reefs are very important ecosystems in the marine and saltwater areas. And so when you lose coral reefs, you lose a tremendous amount of diversity. Again, remember, think about that community and those interconnected species. With about 2°C of warming, you're looking at lots of melting, glacial melting. Again, we're not going to go through all of these things, but you're looking at 90% of coral reefs going bleaching. So you're basically losing all your coral reefs, which is going to have an enormous effect on the biodiversity of the oceans. And we depend upon a lot of that biodiversity, you know, for our seafood and things we eat. So these are all things that are predicted to happen based upon this global increase. And again, as it gets warmer, it just gets worse and worse. And you're looking at long-term equilibrium sea level rise of 13 to 15 meters. Again, if all that ice melts, it's got to go somewhere. A 15-meter rise in sea levels, that would just completely transform the geography of the planet. And so again, these are all things that are predicted from such intense warming. And this 4 degrees Celsius of warming, this is what the models predict is going to happen if we don't do anything. And so this is sort of what we can expect to happen. And so this is like what we have to work from to try to at least stop some of this warming so some of these things don't happen. Again, these models are very simple. You're looking at the emissions that go into the atmosphere and the removals by photosynthesis or the oceans. And it's just like filling a bathtub. And if you're putting more in than you're taking out, well, then the levels have to go up. And we can predict from the levels what the temperatures are going to be. So, you know, the models are complicated, but they're also not that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. And so you may have heard of the Paris Climate Conference, and this is what this conference is about, right? This is countries recognizing that this is a global problem. Countries recognizing that this is going to have an enormous effect on the human population, and agreeing that we need to figure out ways to cut our emissions and to try to control this. You also might be familiar with the Paris Agreement because the United States pulled out and we just left. And we were one of the original countries to help, you know, create this conference and to sign on with this conference, and then we pulled out. So we're basically saying that by pulling out of the Paris Climate Conference, we're saying we don't think this is a problem. We don't think that, you know, we don't feel like we have a responsibility to do anything about it. That's essentially what you're saying with this climate conference. And so that's, you know, that's a significant action that we took. Again, the agreement is countries are pledging to what they'll do to reduce greenhouse. You know, countries saying we're going to specifically do this to reduce our release of carbon in the atmosphere with a goal of to limit the warming to 2 Celsius, right? To avoid that nightmare scenario of 4 or 4.5 degrees Celsius. And then the agreement is you come back every 5 years to evaluate how things are going, to try to come up with better ideas, see what works, what doesn't work, who's doing it, who's not doing it. So, you know, this is what humans try to do when faced with a big problem. Again, United States, we pulled out. These models are very important to try to figure out what's going to happen based upon each country's actions. You know, there's no way we can test this. Again, you do modeling in your head, right? We can sit here and say, well, you know, China produces, you know, less per capita, but their total releases more. So China's a problem. So China needs to cut what they're doing in half. And you can say that, you know, that fossil fuels are not as bad, and what we need to do is enhance. You can in your brain come up with all these different ideas, and you're doing a model, right? The climate models that we use for these sort of decisions are just more sophisticated versions of that based on data. And so again, they're not perfect, but they're the best thing we've got going. And again, these are where scientists take their hypotheses and pit them against each other and see which ones make the most sense. So these are not just some crazy off the wall, oh, here's what I think is going to happen. These things are well vetted by scientific evidence. Excuse me, my neighbors are combining soybeans, if you haven't heard. And I'm getting a little bit of the drift from them. Anyway, again, this is the do nothing scenario. If we just say the heck with it, we're going to keep going on like we're going on. This is what our best guess is what's going to happen in the next 80 years. 80 years is not a very long time. Some of you might still be alive. And so you see the planet 4.5 degrees warmer. That is a significant change. Now, based on the current Paris Agreement, these countries pledge to reduce their CO2 emissions in specific ways. And the models say if everybody did that, then by 2100, the planet would only be 3.5 degrees warmer. Well, that doesn't meet the goal. The goal is 2. So it's better than doing nothing, but it still does not meet the goal. To get to that 2 Celsius goal, to reach that goal, this is what all these different countries or groups are going to have to do. They're going to have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions almost to nothing by 2100 in order to meet that goal. So what does that mean? That means that basically we've reached the point where we have to within 80 years almost stop using fossil fuels just to stop the planet from getting 2 Celsius warmer. We're not talking about getting back to normal. We don't think we will get back to normal. So even if we eventually cut out most of our fossil fuel use, we're never going to get back to normal pre-industrial times, right? The best we can hope for is about a 2 Celsius increase. And this is what it's going to take. Doesn't seem very likely, unless we can make some radical changes. And that seems to be the reality, right? Not everybody agrees. We talked about why do I believe that this is true. You might not believe this is true, but it's based upon our best scientific understanding of these processes. And so the next, every 5 years, they have to meet and make different pledges and see what's working. But again, with the United States pulling out, that probably greatly weakens this agreement. Okay, so a lot of information came from this website. There's a lot more. A lot of cool things that you can look at this website talking about this topic. So if you get a chance, check it out. Again, I just wanted to provide you with some basic information and the sources of that information so you can see why scientists are taking this situation seriously. So yeah, again, I don't hate to leave you on such a bummer, but it is what it is. And I've explained why I think that this is a reasonable thing and why I believe that this is true. You have to decide for yourself what you think is reality and what you think is going to happen and why do you think that. So there you go. That's all I got. Let me know if you got any questions. See ya.